Welcome back to the Chad Hasty Show on News Talk 95.1 FM and 790 AM KFYO. In studio with us this morning. Normally we have him on the phones, but he's getting out of Washington, D.C. here in Lubbock. Been in Lubbock at least since Saturday I know of. Congressman Jodey Arrington, welcome back.
Chad, it's great to be home, and always better to see your pretty mug in person.
See, now you're just playing politics.
I meant Jodey. I'm looking at Jodey's pretty mug.
There you go. Okay, that makes sense. Congressman, I do appreciate you coming in. And obviously, there was a vote last week that we're going to talk about.
I don't know what you're talking about.
Yeah, exactly. This omnibus vote. Let's go ahead and just delve into it. This was a controversial vote, a vote that, as you know, a lot of people were unhappy with. A lot of Republicans were unhappy with. This past Saturday, for those who obviously did not attend, you did show up to the Lubbock County GOP convention. You were the first speaker to address the convention, and I will say this: you probably spent at least 45 minutes taking one-on-one questions and talking to people who had a lot of folded arms while they were talking to you. So let's start off. Just with the omnibus vote, why did you vote for it?
My framework is my conscience, the Constitution, and my constituents. And it wasn't an easy vote for sure. There were bad things or negative aspects to this vote, no question. And I'm not trying to defend the bad aspects of it. I'm just suggesting to and explaining to my constituents that there was no other viable means to fund the military, to rebuild the military after years of cuts. $200 billion, 20% reduction. We are not ready. We are not ready. And we're seeing planes drop out of the sky. We're having soldiers die by 4 times the rate in training-related exercises than on the battlefield, and you've got a Republican president, commander-in-chief, Republican Secretary of Defense, basically begging Congress to just get off the dime and get them the funding so we can deal with China and Russia and certainly the most imminent North Korea, Iran. The list is long. Listen, the Constitution's first sentence and the charge for the federal government is to provide for the common defense. If we don't do that, everything else is a moot issue. It is irrelevant if we can't do that. And I believe that we are at that point where if we continue CRs and shutdowns and we don't get them the funding they need, and this was the largest increase in 15 years, which is good, but it's just a down payment. It's not all we need to get to where we need to be ready for the threats. I'm just telling you, I voted to support our troops, to keep them safe, to give them the tools they need to be successful. As General Mattis says, I don't want a fair fight. If it comes to that in the Korean Peninsula, once the first shot's fired, Chad, at that point, we'd be playing from behind. And at that point, we'd also be spending probably in an unnecessary way and not good stewards. We made the investment now. We held our nose on the – look, deficit increase in deficit spending, for sure. Bad thing. A long-term threat, the biggest long-term threat is national debt and a sovereign debt crisis. But the most immediate threat to national security is the threats that we face and the fact that our troops aren't prepared. They're not prepared and we're not ready. And so that was the reason that I said, on balance, this is necessary. We've got to do it. And I'll go back and explain to the folks back home why. And I believe that for the most part, they share my sentiments.
Doesn't this allow, though, for Democrats to sort of hold you guys hostage? Because if you're going to, and you know me, I'm all about funding the military, having a big, bad, strong military. I totally believe in that. But it seems to me, if you're a Democrat and you hear someone like yourself say, hey, if it comes to funding the military, we have to fund the military, give them 100% of what they want. If I were a Democrat, then I'm going to throw everything in there that I want to, and I'm going to hold you guys hostage. Is that what we're setting up in D.C.? I mean, I know it's been set up that way anyway. So is anything going to change?
So you're right. The 60-vote rule, which is an arbitrary rule placed on the Senate that could be removed by McConnell and the leadership, but that gives 9 Democrats power and leverage over the entire process. And if they know how badly our military is hurting, and they know how strongly we as Republicans feel about getting them the funding they need. And so they do hold the military hostage. Now, here's the thing. We can put it back on the Senate, shut the government down. I'm not opposed to shutting the government down. I think we ought to shut it down and not turn about a third of it back on, if not more. But not when we are facing an imminent threat in North Korea, and not when we're this far in the hole from a preparedness standpoint. There's a time and place to do this. We've got to exercise wisdom and good judgment about how and when we apply these strategies, right? I'm for pushing back. I'm for playing hardball with the Senate and not enabling them, but letting these shortcomings fall on their laps and not on the lap of the House. Look, we passed national authorization acts, balanced budgets, largest entitlement reforms. I could go on and on about what we've done from a fiscal responsibility standpoint and from investing in the military. It never got out of the Senate. So as long as the 60-vote rule is in play, as long as that's in play, we've got one option. And that option is to negotiate with the Democrats on a funding agreement that gives dollar for dollar almost domestic non-defense investment to the dollar for dollar investment in our military. I don't like it. We need to change it. But I'm not willing to wait more years. 18 out of the last 20 years, Chad, 18 out of the last 20, we've had CRs and shutdowns and omnibuses. 18 of the last 20 years. We can't afford to do that. So not another soldier's going to die on my watch on account of me not saying, look, it's a screwed up process. It's broken. We've got to fix it. It's my first year. I'd like to say I could fix everything in 1 year, but I can't. So as long as they give us the funding the military needs and that Mattis needs, you remember what Mattis said the other day at a hearing. He said, if you guys keep doing CRs and if you guys don't get us the funding we need, I'm wasting my time. That's our Secretary of Defense. So look, I bit the bullet and I did this for our troops. And I 100 out of 100 times, I do this. I make the same vote, Chad. Now, after we start getting the military what they need, and this is a 2-year funding agreement, so this is a lot of runway to get them back where they need to be.
Right.
Then we can start talking about playing hardball with the Senate, holding them accountable, and then use my role on this budget and appropriations reform. I'm one of 4 House Republicans, the only freshman, and let's start fixing the process. But I think ultimately the real bottleneck is the 60-vote rule in the Senate. I can't change that. What I can do is vote to get the military the funding, come back to my district and explain to my friends and my conservative allies that this was a necessary thing. It was a hold your nose and vote. There were no poison pills in there, and I'll take all questions about people that think that there was something bad beyond the spending. The spending and the increased deficit spending, that's bad enough. But we didn't have any amnesty DACA fixes. We didn't have a bailout to Obamacare with CSR payments. We didn't advance abortion, or the abortion agenda. What we did was we spent too much money on non-defense so we could get the defense the money. I was willing to do that at this time, because of where we are so deep in the hole and how serious the threats that we face are right now.
When we come back, we'll continue this discussion. We're going to have 2 more segments with Congressman Jodey Arrington. A lot to discuss, not only about the Omnibus, but some moves that were made yesterday as well with the Veterans Administration. We'll get to that later on in the program, so stay tuned for that. Chad Hasty Show, KFYO. Congressman Jodey Arrington in studio. And, Congressman, we've been talking about the Omnibus and your vote for it. And as you can imagine, we've had a lot of people calling into the shows. And you talked, I know, to a lot of people at the county convention on Saturday. one of the things that I keep hearing, and I don't know how many people brought this up to you on Saturday, but one thing that I kept hearing from listeners who were upset was that this vote contained funding for Planned Parenthood. And, we go back to even the debate we had during the, congressional campaign, where we asked the question, would you vote for something that continued to fund Planned Parenthood? You did vote for something that now has funded Planned Parenthood. The first omnibus you voted against.
Yes.
This one did fund Planned Parenthood. Why the difference in the two?
Well, let me make a distinction here because I think it's important. If there was something that advanced the agenda for the people that are pro-choice and pro-abortion, I would have opposed it. The laws did not change. We didn't make any headway. That is, the bill that I signed up to and co-sponsored and passed out of the House that said no more funding to Planned Parenthood never made it out of the Senate. But the Hyde Amendment is still in play, which says no federal dollars can be spent on abortion. But other aspects of organizations, like with women's health care and other things, they can still apply for that. That was the law prior to the omnibus. It's the law today. Nothing changed in that way. We just put money in health care that could be applied for by folks like Planned Parenthood and others. So nothing changed except for funds in buckets that are being vied for and have been for years by organizations that also participate in abortions. We'd love to ban abortion funding for abortion, whether they use the money for that or some other reason, but we couldn't get it passed out of the Senate. So to me, this is the abortion issue was never a reason. Even in my vote in the Omni against the first Omni, that was because we got nothing on defense. We got nothing in return. It looked like a Democrat bill. This one, we got what we wanted on defense. We got more than the president asked for. We got everything that Mattis asked for. But on this deal about the abortion, we haven't lost any ground. We didn't gain any ground, but we didn't lose any ground. And this administration has already said they're not going to fund Planned Parenthood and other abortion providers. This is a 2-year deal. As long as this president's in office and as long as his philosophy prevails in the administration, they're not going to get any more than they would have regardless of how much money was spent. So I don't think that issue, if it said we're going to take the Hyde Amendment away that's in play today and you could use federal monies for abortion, I'd opposed it. I would have voted against it.
But isn't that's not what Republicans have really ever brought up. And even in the debate, I mean, this seems to me, that is one thing that a lot of Democrats bring up about funding of Planned Parenthood is, well, the money doesn't go towards abortion. It goes to other health services, but it's all one big bank account or
Right.
multiple bank accounts. And so
Right.
if they weren't getting federal money for mammograms or whatever with Planned Parenthood, they would have to use their own money in order to fund. Now they can use that government money to fund these other health services and use the money from other donors for abortions.
Yes.
I mean, Republicans have never brought up that, well, we don't want to fund Planned Parenthood because, this money doesn't go towards abortion. That money goes towards this. It's always been, we don't want to fund Planned Parenthood. End of discussion. It sounds like to me now that's not on the table.
I'm not sure I understand the question, but I would tell you that I believe that money to Planned Parenthood, any federal money, because money is fungible, supports their abortion agenda and their abortion part of their abortion mission.
Right.
I believe that. But that was the law before this omnibus.
But doesn't giving them money further that cause of abortion?
They've had money to buy for that. They've had money for that before. They'll have it after. Until we change the law like we did in the House, we did it in the Obamacare repeal. We said no more federal funds, not just for abortion, but for abortion providers. But the Senate wouldn't take it, just like we wouldn't take amnesty. They wouldn't take any advances in pro-life agenda. So it's just status quo is all I'm telling you. But I'm also telling you that this is a funding for 2 years. This administration hasn't funded anything to Planned Parenthood, and I don't believe they will. They're not going to start tomorrow. So we got the money we needed for the defense of this country, and we got monies that will go to women's health. But I don't believe this administration is going to give more fungible funds to Planned Parenthood any more than they would have done had we not done this.
So how does it change? How does it change from to the point? I mean, I guess, is it the Senate? Is that what has to happen? Is that you have to keep the House, which is, that's going to be tough for Republicans to do.
Yes.
In the Senate, Republican numbers may get worse. They may stay the same. Who knows? But you're not anywhere close to 60 votes. So how does it change?
Well, I think you can do some things in terms of the budget process to make it better. We fund too many unauthorized programs. That means we're not looking at them providing appropriate oversight and saying this program's working or it's not. And if it's not, we shouldn't fund it. So there's too many unauthorized funded programs. There's a lot of things that we need to fix about the process. But ultimately, as long as you have the 60 vote rule in the Senate, you're giving a very small minority of Democrats leverage. I think we should go to a 50+1 vote, especially on funding. If you want to argue the policy side for 60, that's one thing. I can understand both sides of that argument. But on funding the government, we ought to go to a simple majority so the American people can hold the majority party accountable for the direction we take this country. Otherwise, you can't. All I do is come on your show and others and say, here's what we've done in the House. We balanced the budget. We had the largest entitlement reform, the largest cut to mandatory spending in 20 years. All these efforts that we're doing in the House are in vain when they hit the shores of the Senate because of this stupid 60 vote rule. That's what it is. It's a foolish rule that puts us as the majority in a bind where our voters think that we don't understand the difference between a conservative agenda and a moderate Democrat agenda. Well, we do. It's just the fact that the reality is that 60 vote or cloture rule is in play, and I either can bitch about it and I can either whine about it or I can keep fighting to fix it, but in the meantime, deal with the reality and get our military the money that they need. That's what I took, the latter path. And that was give the folks that need the money to keep them safe, because those are our sons and daughters. And we shouldn't mess around with their lives because they're risking their lives for us. And we certainly read the Wall Street Journal today that NATO is preparing for more Russian aggression and that Europe's not ready for it. Europe's national security strategy is the United States. Yeah. And I know that's where the Democrats want to go ultimately. Big government, big European-style socialism, very little national security, terrible immigration laws. I won't let that happen. There's a method to this madness, and that is deal with the reality, rebuild that military, and then play hardball with the Senate when you're not risking our troops' safety. There will be a day when we're not risking their safety. And when that day comes, and I think it will come soon because we're making big investments, then we put it on the lap of the Senate and we let them deal with the mess they've created on account of their own stinking rules.
So will this, and we have maybe about a minute left before our next segment, will this omnibus, in your opinion, bring the military up to where it should be right now?
I think it's a big step to bringing it to where it needs to be. But when you have half of the planes in the Navy not flying, and when you have the majority of our Air Force fighter jets not combat ready, it's going to take time. But this will take us a big step forward.
When we come back, we'll continue our discussion with Congressman Jodey Arrington. All right. Chad Hasty Show, News Talk 95.1 FM, 790 AM KFYO. We continue our conversation with Congressman Jodey Arrington here in the KFYO studio. And Congressman, we've had a couple more people who have texted in asking about the whole Planned Parenthood issue. And one thing I wanted to ask you was, a lot of times when you have life issues, when you have Planned Parenthood, abortion, brought up in a bill. A lot of pro-life groups get involved and start making phone calls. Now, I know the Omnibus was out for y'all to read for about a good, 5-7 hours maybe?
It was a terrible process.
So I don't know how many people actually got to read it, but have you heard from any of these groups?
I work with these groups because they have the resources. When you have less than 24 hours to comb through a 2,200-page document, you've got to rely on a lot of folks. And Susan B. Anthony and the National Right to Life and a lot of these well-regarded pro-life groups never put out any statement that said this is a bad vote for pro-life or this was advancing the Planned Parenthood agenda. None of them key voted this. None of them made comments about it. I mean, why do you think if there was any group out there that had an interest in not advancing the abortion agenda in this country, these groups would be out there screaming at the top of their lungs from the rooftops. Yeah. But they aren't, because this wasn't you know what this was? This was a pro-life vote for the life of our troops. This was a pro-life vote for the life of our soldiers who are dying because they don't have the training, because we don't have mechanics, because we don't have the assets, because we don't have the personnel. I could go on and on. I talked to our base commander at Dias. I talked to the generals and to the chiefs of staff for the military. And I'm just telling you that we and I personally have voted for the pro-life agenda every step of my first year in my first term. I could talk about the late-term abortion bill that we passed that I co-sponsored. I could talk about the no funding for Planned Parenthood. I could talk about the Born Alive abortion bill that basically where you have to render life-sustaining medical care for botched abortions. It's hard to believe we couldn't get a single Democrat to vote on that. Are you kidding me? I mean, the late-term abortion, only 7 countries abort children, unborn children after 20 weeks. North Korea, China's on that list, and the United States. I've been pushing this agenda in the House ever since I got there. You could argue that every bill that we pass that's not a pro-life bill doesn't advance pro-life, but it doesn't advance the abortion. It just keeps the status quo. And this bill wasn't about abortion. It wasn't about the issue of life, except for the life of our troops. That's why I voted for it, and I'd do it again if I had the choice today.
A different angle on that.
Yeah.
Different angle on that. From a listener, my big question is, why are we giving money to a company that in turn makes political donations? New law should be if you have money for political contributions, you shouldn't receive any government support.
You know what?
They are supporting one party. I mean, let's be honest.
No, I agree with that. I mean, I'm not a fan of Planned Parenthood. It's why
right.
That's why I was the co-sponsor for defunding Planned Parenthood. That's why when I was doing my debate and battling with Democrats on the budget committee, when we passed the defund of Planned Parenthood in our repeal of Obamacare legislation that went nowhere when it went to the Senate, I was fighting for defunding Planned Parenthood, for the fungibility issue we talked about, where you're indirectly subsidizing it, and for the reason your listener talked about. It's a political organization. We all know that. Again, I'm not going to be any less. I'm not going to be any less tolerant of the abortionists and the Planned Parenthoods that get federal money. I'm not going to be any less zealous to fight for pro-life. I just don't think you could make this argument on every bill we pass. Jodey, why did you vote for the Cotton and the Farm Bill, but you didn't repeal the funding for Planned Parenthood for things other than abortion? Well, you could make that every time. So we're fighting on all these fronts. This battlefront was a battle for the resources so that our troops could keep us safe and free. That's what this was about.
In the Omnibus, on the show before, you have mentioned that there is I don't want to say it's 100%, but there's a very, very good chance that next generation of bomber will be at Dias Air Force Base. We've talked about that before. Is there anything new on that front? And did this Omnibus have anything to do with the new bomber?
Our bomber pilots are in the same position other pilots are. Our bombers The bomber assets are in the same position. They're in trouble. We don't have the mechanics. We don't have the maintenance, and we don't have the flight training hours. This funding for the military will go to continuing the R&D and development of the B-21, which we believe that with all certainty, almost 100%, that we're going to base those B-21s at Dyess. It's going to go to building out the infrastructure so we can be the first to base the B-21, the next generation bomber. So absolutely, I've talked to the commander. I've talked to these guys. If y'all, I'm telling you, Chad, if you and many of your listeners were sitting down in these classified briefings with the generals and with our commanders out here in the bases, you would walk away and just shudder to think of what would happen if we actually had to engage in a conflict right now. And Lord help us if we had to sustain two conflicts. So this is about rebuilding the military. That's plain and simple, and it's about the life of our men and women in uniform who are risking their lives for us. I'm not going to play politics with our sons and daughters in harm's way.
Let's go to the phones. Wayne's been waiting for a while, and Wayne, you're on with Congressman Jodey Arrington.
Yeah, how are you, Congressman? First off, I'm retired Army, so I'd like to thank you for your support for our troops.
You bet, Wayne.
And my question after he signed the bill, I was listening to him explaining why.
You talking about the president?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes. But he mentioned line item vetoes. Now, is that something he can use to cut funding for some of these unauthorized programs, maybe even Planned Parenthood?
No, he doesn't have the line item veto, unfortunately, because if he did, that's exactly the strategy we would use to block all of the unnecessary spending where we don't really have the money and it's a want versus a need, and we just carve it up so that it goes to our military, and probably that's it. I mean, we'd sustain levels, but we wouldn't increase levels of spending in anything else. Unfortunately, he doesn't have that line item opportunity.
Okay.
Wayne,
that's all I needed to know.
Yeah,
Thank
good
you.
question. Thanks for your service, Wayne.
Appreciate it, Wayne. But before because you've got to get out of here pretty soon, right? Or
but you know what? I want every question that your I mean, I wish I could stay. I stayed at the GOP convention until everybody asked their questions or got off their chest their concerns. None of their questions or concerns changed my vote or my view on this. I've waited I've prayed about it, and I stand firm on this. And people that know me, people that have watched me operate and represent West Texas up there and push for the things that we care about, and that know my heart and my values and my commitments to making the changes and making the difference that we hope to make up there, they know why I did this. They know exactly why. And you're not going to make everybody happy, and these are the tough votes that I knew would come, and I'm at peace.
The president did give us some more news yesterday, and it seems to happen a lot. And he fired the secretary of the VA, and there's going to be a new VA secretary. Any thoughts there?
Well, we got a West Texan at the helm now. Pretty cool to have a Leveland Lobo as our new VA secretary. So I'm, without even knowing him, I can tell you he's going to have some good common sense and judgment to bring to bear on a very big and unwieldy bureaucracy. Chad, you've heard me before. I mean, talk about the bureaucracy, I think, is the biggest threat to our veterans. And we've done, here's a good track record of success for the Republican-led Congress. 25 bills, veteran-related bills, have passed the House. 14 have become law, and that's greater access to health care, enhanced educational opportunities, streamlined processes, accountability to fire people without having an act of Congress to do so when somebody's not doing their job. This has been a big, bright spot for the Republican Congress, and our veterans are all the better served because of it. But there's the big bureaucracy, and there's the union grip on that bureaucracy. That was my first bill filed, so I'm going to get alongside our fellow West Texan and Randy Jackson, and I'm going to ask him to help me move this union bill forward so we can truly break up the nonsense of people spending 100% of their time, VA employees, on union activity and not the job they were hired to do. That's outrageous, and I'm sure a West Texan like Randy Jackson will share my sentiments.
Before we wrap it up, Farm Bill. Politico had another headline yesterday. I think this is the second headline within 2 weeks about killing the Farm Bill, about a possible fight killing the Farm Bill. There's a debate over food stamps. Any reason ag producers need to worry right now?
There are lots of ways to skin this cat. We're doing the right thing. Mike Conaway's doing the right thing to reform SNAP, which is 90% of the funding, about $90 billion. Look, the sort of biblical principle is if you don't work, you don't eat. And too often we've allowed folks to make a lifestyle out of government assistance. If you're an able-bodied person, you ought to work. You ought to be required to work. And that's all this does, is move people into the dignity of work and the blessing of a good, honest, hard day's work. But it also gets folks off the welfare doles who shouldn't be there when you have 6 million surplus jobs. I mean, that's common sense. Democrats and Republicans alike ought to support that, but because we're in a midterm election year, you're going to see Democrats oppose something so rational, so common sense, that no one will believe it when we say Democrats are opposed to work requirements for able-bodied people. So that's where it's getting hung up. Hey, we're going to take this vote whether we get a Democrat to support that or not because it's the right thing to do. And I think our base will reward us. Quite frankly, I think the Democrat base is going to scratch their head and say, now what? So I'm feeling good about that. I'm feeling good about reining in the unions. I hope we get that vote. There's still a lot of things we can do, but we've got a great record, Chad. It's on us to go out and sell it and not be scared of the opposition. What I'm scared of is Nancy Pelosi being the leader of the House and this big government agenda being thrust on our economy and on our people and on our states once again. Remember what it felt like after 8 years of Barack Obama and Nancy Pelosi. We've made some headways. The economy's growing. Veterans are better served. We're strengthening our national security. We're holding people accountable, and we're staving off illegal immigration thanks to a strong law and order president. That's what you're going to get from me. That's what you're going to get from a Republican majority. Let's go out and sell it.
Congressman, appreciate your time today.